Looking at past Nintendo consoles, none of them have reached cult classic status quite like the GameCube. During its lifespan, it was one of the poorest selling Nintendo consoles. It didn't sell horribly, just much less than other popular consoles. Nowadays, the GameCube has been making quite a resurgence, as many people are either discovering or replaying these classics. Even though I didn't grow up with many GameCube games, it has quickly become one of my favorite Nintendo consoles. And with multiple GameCube remasters releasing this year, as well as some that are rumored to release soon, I think this is the perfect time to look back on the history of one of Nintendo's most unique consoles. The start of the GameCube's development can be traced all the way back to 1998, only 2 years after the Nintendo 64 launched. That year, Nintendo started a partnership with a company called ArtX, which was made up of former Silicon Graphics employees who developed the Nintendo 64 graphics chip. ArtX helped develop the graphics processor on the GameCube, which was called Flipper to go along with the GameCube's codename, Dolphin. In the year 2000, ArtX was acquired by ATI Technologies, which is what you see on the small sticker on the front of the console. ATI also developed the Hollywood chip for the Wii, which is based on Flipper, but that's a discussion for another day. The GameCube was initially announced as Project Dolphin at a press conference in 1999, where they also announced the Flipper GPU and the Gecko CPU by IBM. A little over a year later, the console was fully revealed as the GameCube at Space World 2000. This event revealed a handful of upcoming games for the system, along with multiple tech demos. This included first looks at Luigi's Mansion and Metroid Prime, and the tech demos included a Pokemon party game, Link fighting Ganondorf, and Super Mario 128. Super Mario 128 is easily the most well-known tech demo for the GameCube, and it featured 128 Mario models walking around a disc-like surface. The game served as a basis for multiple mechanics in multiple Nintendo games throughout the 2000s, such as Pikmin, Spearwalking in Mario Galaxy, and the Iron Boots in Twilight Princess. Following Space World 2000, other games and features were announced. The system finally released on September 14, 2001. It was released later in North America on November 18, 2001, and in Europe on May 3, 2002. At first glance, a GameCube looks like any other video game console from the time, a competent system with a somewhat quirky design. But like other Nintendo consoles, the GameCube has much more to offer than what's on the surface. The most memorable and unique attribute of the system is the controller, which has a very interesting design compared to most other standard video game controllers. The A button is prioritized, and it's the largest button on the front, which makes sense as it's usually the most important. The B button is smaller, but it's positioned to the left of the A button as it's also heavily utilized. The X and Y buttons are above the A button and are less accessible than A and B due to their less frequent use. The top of the controller includes a bumper and analog triggers, which are very useful in Luigi's Mansion and Super Mario Sunshine. It's weird how Nintendo hasn't brought back the analog triggers much since then, as it's a standard on most modern consoles. This was also the first Nintendo controller to include a C-stick, which replaced the C buttons on the Nintendo 64. It has been a standard ever since then. The only issue with the controller is the D-pad, which is too small and isn't very good, but it's not much of a problem since most games use the analog stick. The GameCube controller overall is really memorable and is one of the most popular Nintendo controllers to this day, especially due to its usefulness in competitive Smash. The GameCube controller has been compatible on every Nintendo console since the GameCube, and it still gets official and licensed releases every so often. On top of the memorable controller, the GameCube also has some other interesting functions and additions as well. It's the first Nintendo console to have a home menu, which is a standard that each following Nintendo console expanded upon. The home menu is simple, yet useful, as you can manage your memory card, set the time and date, adjust screen settings, and start up a game. I also really like the aesthetic the GameCube menu is going for, as it has a very distinct early 2000s Y2K style that no other Nintendo console has captured. A new, but not so new addition to the GameCube was a LAN adapter, which supported LAN play with other GameCube systems, and even online multiplayer. I say not so a new addition because the Satellaview on the Super Famicom was actually the first Nintendo accessory to utilize the internet, but that was sort of a different thing. Online play on the GameCube was extremely underutilized, and was only used in 5 games total, 3 of which being Phantasy Star Online games, and the other 2 being the Japanese exclusives Homeland and a Power Pros game. On the other hand, the LAN functionality worked with more popular titles, such as Mario Kart Double Dash and Kirby Air Ride, but still wasn't used with very many games. I'm surprised that Nintendo didn't use the online or LAN functionality with more games, because this feature seemed to have a lot of potential. The GameCube was the first Nintendo console to use discs. Wait, no it wasn't. That was the Famicom Disk System. And even then, the Nintendo 64 DD happened after that. Well, not exactly the first, but it was the first Nintendo console to use DVD-like discs, and to use them in all regions. On the Nintendo 64, the cartridge format was starting to limit developers with storage, as many games, especially some released on the PS1, could not be ported over. With the GameCube, Nintendo finally started to use discs primarily, but wait, something's kind of off about these discs. They're smaller than regular DVDs. That's because Nintendo decided to be different and use mini DVDs as the format for game releases. I guess Nintendo didn't learn their lesson since the Nintendo 64, as mini DVDs only have a storage capacity of 1.5 gigabytes as opposed to 4.7 gigabytes that a regular DVD can hold. This severely limited the games that could be released on the GameCube, and it's why so many third-party games didn't release on the system, and many of them had to be split up into 2 discs. On top of that, the regular GameCube models didn't even play DVDs. Around this time, the PS2 and original Xbox had DVD compatibility, so the GameCube was also behind in that aspect. There was the Panasonic Q, but that was only released in Japan, and it was really rare. So, yeah, in general, the GameCube really didn't have DVD support. One thing the GameCube surprisingly was compatible with, though, was the Game Boy family of systems. In 2003, the Game Boy Player accessory was released for the GameCube and could allow you to play Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games on the system, similar to how games could be played on the Super Game Boy on the SNES. Some games, such as Super Mario Advance 4 SMB3 and the Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, could even support Rumble, which was a pretty cool addition. They even added the Rumble support on the Nintendo Switch version of these games on Nintendo Switch Online. The most important aspect of the GameCube, like any other console, is its library of games. Out of all Nintendo consoles, I personally feel that it delivers one of the best game libraries. It introduced so many memorable franchises, such as Luigi's Mansion, Pikmin, Animal Crossing in the West, Metroid Prime, and Mario Strikers. Many existing Nintendo series also got memorable new entries that are still talked about frequently to this day, like Super Smash Bros. Melee, Mario Sunshine, Mario Party 4-7, Mario Kart Double Dash, Paper Mario TTYD, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and more. Games like TTYD and Melee specifically are still considered to be favorites among their respective fan bases. I can especially say so personally for Thousand Year Door, as it's my favorite Paper Mario game, and I hope it gets ported to the Switch at some point. Along with all of the fan favorites and new franchises, the GameCube is also known for many of Nintendo's more niche and underrated exclusives. This includes Chibi Robo, which unfortunately has gotten the short end of the stick from Nintendo, Baten Kaitos, which is developed by Monolith Soft, the Xenoblade and Xenosaga devs, and is coming to Switch in September, Pokemon Colosseum, and XD Gale of Darkness, which are story-focused spin-offs based on Pokemon Stadium's combat. And finally, another one of my favorites, Kirby Air Ride, which is a Kirby-themed racing game with a memorable city trial mode. Overall, the GameCube has an excellent library of games that many people still love to play to this day. While the GameCube is a very unique and memorable console, during its heyday, the sales underperformed. It only sold 21.74 million, which isn't too bad compared to most prior game consoles at the time, but it did perform worse than any other Nintendo home console up to that point, and much less than the PS2, which was by far the best-selling video game console. It was even slightly outsold by the original Xbox by around 2 million units, which was a completely new platform at the time. So the GameCube was not really successful for Nintendo, and definitely led to them rethinking their strategy for marketing and functionality of their consoles. As Nintendo developed the Wii, they used many components from the GameCube in the design of their console. On top of having the GameCube backwards compatibility and controller support, the Wii's GPU is a modified version of the GameCube Flipper GPU, and the core architecture of the IBM Gecko CPU would be built off of in the Broadway and Espresso CPUs for the Wii and Wii U respectively. The prototype for the Wii even utilized the GameCube in different ways, such as the Revolution emulator used to develop Wii games on the GameCube when the Wii's hardware was still in development. And the Wiimote and Nunchuck prototypes were originally tested on the GameCube. So even though the GameCube wasn't a success for Nintendo during its prime, it led to one of Nintendo's most successful consoles. 2 decades later, the GameCube has been making somewhat of a resurgence among gamers and Nintendo fans. There's definitely a high demand for these games to be ported and remastered to the Switch, as many GameCube games are pretty expensive, leading to some people emulating them. Thankfully, Nintendo seems to be listening, and we're finally getting some GameCube re-releases on Nintendo Switch. Originally, we got Super Mario Sunshine along with 3D All-Stars in 2020. And this year, we're getting the Pikmin games along with Baten Kaitos, and then Metroid Prime that released earlier this year. So hopefully, Nintendo and other developers continue to re-release these games so more people can play them. So anyways, the GameCube is a very interesting console. Released at the beginning of the millennium, it serves as sort of a crossroads between classic and modern Nintendo. While I didn't play the GameCube much when I was younger, I do remember playing Mario Kart Double Dash at a friend's house, which was a pretty fun experience. I eventually started to collect GameCube games around 2019, where I started to have an appreciation for the console. Despite the fact that GameCube games are expensive nowadays, I do find them fun to collect, as there's a lot of great games for the system. Now, it's one of my top 3 Nintendo consoles alongside the Wii and the Switch. So anyways, what are your thoughts on the GameCube, and do you have any favorite games? Let me know down in the comments. So yeah, thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more, and make sure to check out my Discord server if you want to. Goodbye.